As the great philosopher Socrates said to his student Plato on the road from Athens, hey, what's up? How you guys doing? Having a good day? Let's stretch out a little bit. All right, okay, there we go. There we go. I am going to try and demystify, actually a lot of this is about, okay, we've talked about regulatory, we've talked about policy all day long, like what the hell do we actually do? And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. A modest proposal on managing regulatory risk in the crypto asset industry. Yes. Hackers and Founders, I'm the CEO and founder of it. We started off with a couple of mates and me in a bar in Sunnyvale, California, talking about building tech startups about 10 years ago. 2009, 2010 happened. Those events ended up going somewhat viral. They've now been held in about 130 cities around the globe. A couple 100,000 tech entrepreneurs have attended our events. You guys are all testament to this global explosion of innovation in the technology space. The problem is I've had thousands of conversations with entrepreneurs who end up complaining about, dude, how do I raise $5 million? How do I raise $1 million for my project? If you are not in Silicon Valley, it's really fucking hard to actually do that. The markets and the nerds have essentially screamed, and we've used this blockchain thing to kind of explode into this crowdfunding space. And you hear that sound? That is the sound of venture capital getting disrupted. Isn't that beautiful? When you run a mailing list of nerds, you end up doing weird shit. Like occasionally the US government decides that they're going to try to break DNS. And they're going to say, pass these laws called SOPA and PIPA. And then you start to get hundreds and hundreds of emails saying, dude, they're going to break DNS. Like the government is going to break the internet. What the fuck? We need to protest. And I'm like, what? Oh, okay. So I Googled, how do I actually organize a protest? And 36 hours later, I was in front of City Hall in San Francisco with about 120 nerds and about 200 cameras in front of us. And that day that all the websites like Google and Wikipedia ended up kind of putting a black bar and saying we were protesting SOPA and PIPA. Ever since then, I'm on an awfully weird policy mailing list. I get invited to weird discussions, and about 20% of my time is now talking with governments. I came back to code. I went back to school for software engineering when I was about 30. And I'm sort of starting that learning. I enjoyed kind of the complexity, the math, the systems thinking, how that all works. Law is something of a similar kind of code base to me, except that law actually runs governments. So when you have a bunch of other entrepreneurs, you end up building hacks. Like, for instance, immigration reform has been a little bit of a problem in the United States, if you guys might have noticed recently. We like our children in cages, thank you very much. How Machiavellian of us. I got sick of seeing my friends deported after they'd come to Silicon Valley and raised money. So we worked with the Obama administration on comprehensive immigration reform. That didn't go so well because Congress. And so our head of advocacy, Craig Montori, actually spun out a project called the Global EIR Program. It turns out that there's a loophole, a hack in immigration law where there's a category of U.S. visas which is issued without limit and pretty much without complaint, and that is research visas at universities. So Craig said this, he said, hey, let's actually create an exploit. Let's create an entrepreneur in residence fellowship at universities. And so let's actually import entrepreneurs to the United States as research fellows. The university rubber stamps the visa. The entrepreneur volunteers 4 to 8 hours a week at the university. In exchange, they get a 3-year visa. If you guys are interested in a nonprofit to actually donate, please actually think of globaleir.org. Our first 40 visas have a 100% approval rate in the United States, even underneath the Trump administration. I told you I get involved in some weird shit, right? So I get sick of seeing entrepreneurs raise money. How do I raise money? And so a law school I advised in Silicon Valley asked me, said, hey, Jonathan, there's this thing called the Jobs Act, crowdfunding laws in the United States. Can you help us write some comments on the Jobs Act? And we'll submit it not just from the university, but under Hackers and Founders. And I was like, sure, how can I help? So we helped by submitting 80 pages of comments to the SEC on crowdfunding reform. We actually ended up a year and a half later getting quoted in the regulations. And I ended up meeting one of the SEC commissioners at an event, and I was like, hey, how can I help? I love what you guys are doing on the job act. She's like, we don't really understand what's going on with like small companies raising money. I'm like, you guys don't have beer with thousands of entrepreneurs? She's like, no. I'm like, well, you should come to one of my events. Like, they'll give you an earful about their problems on raising capital. She's like, would you be interested in joining an advisory committee? And I was like, do I have to wear pants at the meetings? Because I usually like to wear shorts. I dressed up for you guys. These are business jeans. I normally wear business shorts. But I was invited to join an SEC advisory committee, so I had a suit made. I'm the only guy with a ponytail in the building. We've been at the SEC a couple of years, really doing a root cause analysis about why so much capital gets concentrated in Silicon Valley. And when you do the root cause analysis, it's because Silicon Valley is where the liquidity happens. It's where Google acquires startups. You have about 5 tech companies that ended up acquiring the vast majority of tech companies in the world. 85% of the world's tech M&A emanates in Silicon Valley, in this weird little 100-kilometer area of the world. So investors have made a shit ton of money over the last 70 years investing into private tech companies. So this is where, if you're a tech company, you go, you can get acquired, and you can generally raise money. That kind of drives me crazy. It feels like the system is broken to me. We in the crypto industry, I think, have been part of the unbreaking, the unfucking of that system. And we are actually, these digital tokens, these blockchain tokens, are actually very eminently tradable. It's very easy to do crowdfunding. It's kind of the killer app. One of the initial killer apps for for crowdfunding, except that, dun dun dun. You guys see what I did there? The SEC, Death Star, SEC, Death Star. Whoa, whoa. So I was in the belly of the Death Star, and the people actually are kind of nice. They have crap food. They have to sign agreements saying that they can't personally benefit from anything that you actually do inside of the SEC. But they're just really, their job is to actually enforce the rules that Congress and the Supreme Court hand down, and their hands are kind of stuck. And then we have like, oh my God, Bitcoin's happening, and the people, the regulators are like, what the hell do we actually do with all of this? They have actually been, I thought, surprisingly nuanced. I'll say that again. I think that the SEC has been shockingly nuanced about this. They are bound by, as I said, Supreme Court laws. And so, the SEC's mandate is to regulate securities. The Supreme Court defines securities by, if someone wants to buy your shit to make a profit on what you do, that intent of making a profit on what you do, that intent makes that thing a security. When I first started this whole thing, I thought that stock was securities. That's just what securities were, right? Because it's the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's what Wall Street does. They buy and sell stock. It turns out I was woefully wrong. There are many different kinds of securities. Debt and loans are securities. You can bundle loans and then sell parts of the bundles. Derivatives are securities. Options are securities. And you know what? Guess what? Your token is now a security. I don't make the rules. This is United States focused. I don't make the rules. I just explain them. Let's all get over that. Tokens are securities. Can we say it together? Tokens are securities. We'll vomit now. But in the United States regulatory system, you kind of want your token to be a security. Why? Because there's this really underappreciated division of the U.S. government called FinCEN. They're the ones who handle banking laws. And what nobody actually talks about in the crypto industry is that they actually said, if your token isn't a registered security, then bitch, your ass is mine, and you need a money transfer license from me, and that's going to cost about $1 million per state. And there are 58 legal jurisdictions in the United States. So if your token is not a security, you're a money transfer business, and you need to pay about $60 million over the course of 5 years to essentially get banking licenses. So you kind of want to do this. It's not that bad, though. People have been raising billions of dollars a year, by selling securities. Venture capital is a $30 billion a year industry. Angel investment's a $25 billion a year industry. We're just barely starting to actually achieve that sort of pace in the crypto space. And so basically, very simple guidelines about what you can do if you're going to issue a token. Really, just fuck the United States. Keep unaccredited investors out of this thing. The U.S. gets very, very upset if poor people make bad investment decisions. And so the poorest 94% of the U.S. population is not allowed to actually purchase securities. They don't really care if they buy them. They really care if you sell it to them. So if you're issuing a token, just don't sell it to the poorest 94% of the United States. Yes, strong KYC AML. We've been talking about this all day. Basically, please do not fund terrorism. Or narco-terrorists. That's pretty much it. Really, just ignore the United States. Sure, it's 25% of the world's economy, but really, it's only 25% of the world's economy. Yes, when you're thinking of legal jurisdictions, think about Gibraltar, Cayman, Malta, Switzerland. We've been talking about this all day long. And now I want to talk a little bit about, that's what you can do as you're issuing your own ICO. What I also want to talk about is what I think we need to do as an industry. How do we actually develop a set of best practices and best standards? And this is something that I'm really passionate about. I think that we need to actually kind of take examples. We're all, who doesn't code in the room? Most of us program, that's fine. In programming land, we actually have this thing, in Python, the Python programming language, we have this thing called the Python Expansion Proposal System. And it's actually a very interesting kind of crowdsourced peer review sort of process to actually come up with a standard and a change to the Python programming language. I think that we could actually kind of emulate something like this for like, what does a non-shit white paper look like? Let's actually talk together about these are good white papers, these are bad white papers. If we're going to actually say, hey, maybe we should actually ask people to have white papers, they should just really front and center put like what legal jurisdiction you're in. Who are the founders? I don't know, maybe background checks. Anybody done criminal background checks in any ICOs they've invested in? Nicely done, Miko, my man. But let's actually start talking about this. And nerds have been doing this on email mailing lists for, the last 20 years. Let's just not reinvent the wheel. Let's actually think if we can actually do something like the Python Expansion Proposal System. I think, and a lot of us complain about kind of shit ICOs and shit coins, and a lot of the crime and a lot of that drags the rest of us who are trying to take a white hat approach to this industry down. I think that what the industry needs is something of a ratings agency. Is there a way, and I don't know, but is there a way to come up with some sort of a distributed model to actually be able to rate these financial products that we're actually issuing, these tokens? Vinay actually had a really good point last night. He's like, maybe you could actually use some sort of like Gnosis prediction markets. That's fascinating. But are there ways that we can kind of come up with a distributed mechanism for people to kind of rate and say, this is a shit coin, this is a good coin, and let's put that on chain? I don't know what it looks like, but I think if we're going to mature as a financial industry, if we're going to mature as an asset-based industry, that we're going to have to start dealing with something like a ratings agency type of thing. Another thing that I think nerds have done very well at in the InfoSec space is they actually talk to, like, the black hat hackers have this event every year, and they get together with, like, the FBI agents and people from the NSA, and they, like, talk. And it's a demilitarized zone, essentially. Woe is you if you actually bring a cell phone or any sort of, stupid electronic device to a DEF CON event, because you will get hacked, but it's all kind of in good fun. The idea is let's get everybody to the table and let's just talk. A large problem that I've noticed when startups and tech people actually interact with policy is that we tend to do it in our own native languages. We tend to do it in online forums. We tend to do it on email listservs. We tend to bitch about things on Reddit or Hacker News. And we upvote and we downvote. Like, the governments don't understand upvotes and downvotes. They don't understand karma systems, but they actually do like to talk to people. So let's think about, is there a way that we could create kind of a global DEF CON where people issuing tokens and government regulators, we could all just kind of get together and talk? I love events like this when we actually had the government of Gibraltar actually come in. Can we please do more of these globally? How do we do that? Another thing is as a crypto asset industry, we're kind of whipped about by the press. You know, if you essentially look at, Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times coverage in the fall, it was like, oh my God, Bitcoin, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, everyone, Bitcoin. And then it was, oh my God, Bitcoin, and, money laundering, and people are breaking things, and the hacks and that sort of stuff. What if we actually all get in as a crypto asset industry, we all chipped in a couple of bucks and just hired like a PR organization to actually start driving, hey, these are really good use cases of blockchain. And let's actually start highlighting some of the positive aspects of this so that we don't actually get the ban hammer down. Because you know what? People in politics and people in government, they tend to actually read the news. And if all they read is a steady stream of, crypto break-ins, wallets are being hacked, money's being lost, oh my God, Silk Road, Silk Road, Silk Road, Silk Road. I'm so sick of hearing about Silk Road. You know what? Let's actually start getting some of our positive stories out there. At Hack Fund, we just paid like $100,000 to bring on a very expensive PR firm. I hope that we can actually start doing some of this, but I would love it if other kind of players in the space could actually start doing this to provide air cover to the crypto asset industry. Another thing which has actually come out of my work with UC Hastings Law School is that there's an interesting hack so that you can actually influence policy in the future. Law schools and law professors tend to actually have to do research, and they like to research kind of edge areas of innovation, that sort of stuff. The advantage of actually having legal professors and academics do research on your subject matter is that when a case actually goes to court, the judges and the lawyers look for prior case law. And a lot of times, if these topics have never been studied before, i.e. blockchain didn't really exist before, then they actually start looking at, well, what have other smarter people actually said or done? What lawyers at law schools have actually given opinions on these sorts of things? So I think that there's an interesting hack to be done if we as a crypto asset industry start financing government and legal research and academic research into these topics. And just say, hey, lawyers, we've actually talked with about 5 different academics about what we're doing in terms of our legal structure and our hack fund, the economics and that sort of stuff, with the hope that they will actually produce academic literature on our fund. Why? So that we can actually start to lead the conversation over the next 5, 10 years as those academic papers go into academic research, as those professors start to teach their students, and we teach another new generation. This, I think, is a very interesting hack, and I would love to see more crypto companies actually doing stuff like this and thinking long-term about this sort of stuff. The last thing is I really think that we just need a lobby. In the United States, my experience with the SOPA and PIPA debate was actually rather shocking. So what had happened was you had a lot of the lawyers from Hollywood that had actually been lobbying the US government, and they said, copyright, 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 copyright. You have to protect my intellectual property. Our industry is dying because piracy, 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 piracy. And so they had lobbied enough so that these senators finally said, oh, yeah, sure, I'm going to help you out. You've given me money for years to help me, in my election campaigns. I'm going to help you out and pass SOPA and PIPA. And the nerds were like, dude, what the fuck are you thinking? You're breaking DNS. You can't break DNS. And so there was kind of an uproar. When I actually spent time talking with some of the politicians, I don't expect the politicians to really kind of understand DNS and networking. I do expect some of their staffers who are responsible for technology policy to understand some of these things. But it turns out, at least in the United States, the technology staffers for most politicians in the United States tend to be the kid who was good at the Twitter during the election campaign. And so you end up having someone who is responsible for social media marketing in a political campaign being the geek in the group, and then they get nominated as a technology staffer. Our legislator, Zoe Lofgren, our representative in California, she's incredibly bright. She is an English major, but she's actually educated herself on networking protocols and low-level kind of technology stuff. One of her technology staffers is one of 3 trained software engineers in Congress staffing the government. Let me say it again. The U.S. Congress, the staffers, have 3 software engineers. That's it. There's probably several thousand congressional staffers. So how do we actually start to educate some of these congressional staffers? How do we actually start to educate some of these regulators? I think that we actually need to come up with like a trade organization and start going to DC, start going to state legislatures, and actually just start having, before shit hits the fan, like we did with SOPA and PIPA, why don't we actually start building relationships, that's called lobbying in Washington, D.C., but let's actually start educating these people about some of the good things that we're actually able to do and some of the transformative stuff so they can actually start thinking so that we can be the experts that they end up calling on when the shit does hit the fan. And why do we need to do this? Because, the SEC's friends with the FBI, and the FBI has guns in jails. I'm not at all interested in being sent to jail. Mama didn't raise a prison bitch, excuse me. And I don't think that would be a problem if I went to jail because I am a large man. But the point of the whole deal is that I don't even want it to be an issue. We've talked with 12 different law firms in about 10 different legal jurisdictions. The lawyer that actually was on point for us was a former U.S. federal prosecutor. And when I talked with him, what I said was, look, I've worked in heavily regulated industries. I know there is business risk. My job as an entrepreneur is to minimize my business risk for maximum upside potential. When I worked in heavily regulated industries like healthcare, you try to minimize your legal risk and do the best thing for the patient. When I talked with this lawyer, I said, look, I want to do the best thing for my investors. I want to protect them. I want to do this. But what are the things, because there's all this anxiety about regulatory problems, what are the things that I can actually do? What are the things that will send me to jail? What are the things that would get me censured and my hand slapped and I never work in finance again? What are the things that would give me a stern wag of the finger? What are the things that might get me a look? And what are the things that are okay? That's really kind of the broad range of enforcement actions that you can actually kind of receive in this space. And I'm assuming that Europe is probably fairly similar. And what he said was, look, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal like your mama told you. If you do that stuff, you're going to end up in jail. Protect your investors. If there is no blood in the water and your investors don't lose massive amounts of money, chances are you're probably not going to get censured or barred from doing this. Bernie Madoff lied, stole, he went to jail. Other people, fraudsters, or maybe they just were loose about some of their legal stuff. People lost a bunch of money. They get censured, they get removed. They can't actually be a CEO of a company. They can't issue securities anymore. But there's a number of enforcement actions which are like, you know what, dude, don't do this again. You've issued an unregistered security. Your token is a security, but just be cool. This is how you should actually do it. And then there's the other option, which is, let's actually build a good white hat industry so that what we do doesn't become a crime. That's what I got. Do you have time for 2 or 3 questions?
Yeah, sure, questions.
A couple of questions?
Yeah.
I'm 6'7", 350 pounds, very svelte. Yes?
So living on the other side from the security side,
yep.
Pursuing software licensing, this is a modern way for how we're going to do telecommunications and media, leveraging blockchain as the key management infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that is so far away. It might be regulated by the telecoms industry, but it is so far away from a security and its operational characteristics that we're right now, even the concept of calling it an asset, I think is a mistake. I think that tokens are not an asset. An asset is one of the categories. And so as long as we narrow this to the category where it's only storing assets, that's intriguing. But I think there's a fundamental shift in how we're monetizing a network effect. So and we haven't monetized the network effect. And so there's a huge chunk that I actually think we've been affected by the California-centric venture capital thinking, which has actually flipped tokens from where they were originally into, like, the SAFT was an amazingly bad idea because it reframed it in a venture capital language. It's not the bad idea of the structure of the transaction as much as it was just the pure language used in connection with the capabilities we're trying to explore. And I think we should attempt to move back in the direction of software assets and license management and reselling and margin, and move away from letting this whole space be captured by a purely financial services centric. We'll miss the big thing. Money's the demo.
So I'm talking about issuing tokens, and I'm talking about token issuance. If people are going to buy your tokens because they will make a profit, that is a security. Whether the original definition of security came from a land exchange. And so I'm just saying, we can argue till we're blue in the face about there's utility, there's a great use case, it's a monetary system, it's economic incentives. I completely get you. As far as the US SEC is concerned, these are securities. And that's not I don't care what your opinion on the utility of your token is or not. This is the Supreme Court's decision.
Yeah. But then be specific to the Howey test, which is more than just that statement. And so I think we have
Not
to
really.
be...
There's 4 statements on the Howey test, and it boils down to, are people going to make a profit from your efforts?
It's more complicated than that.
Okay, I just served on an SEC committee, and so that's what I learned. Other people might be smarter than me at this sort of stuff. Any other questions?
It's super messy. I just wanted to drop a phrase into the conversation. When I want to explain that thing, what I usually say is, cryptocurrency is today's horseless carriage. Right? Cryptocurrency, horseless carriage. It looks sort of kind of like a currency. You could kind of sort of use it as a currency. But you put all this stuff together, it's 1,000 times bigger and weirder than currency ever was. So I just thought it was a useful phrase.
Last question.
How far down the road are you in your efforts to set up a lobbying organization in D.C.?
So we actually talked with a number of people in the industry. The investors generally don't want to have anything to do with government. People in the technology space, generally they're just kind of scrambling if they have to deal with the government. They're like, oh yeah, it's a good idea, we should be proactive. And then they get bossed. When it actually comes to, dude, would you actually chip in $25K to actually be able to hire someone to actually manage this? People get really kind of skittish and busy. So we've actually just decided that we're going to start doing this in-house. Eventually, I would like to have our director of advocacy in-house as well as our director of policy in-house. Right now, they're kind of external to us. But I'm having a lot of conversations about it, and everybody's like, yeah, we should, that's a good idea. But that's where we're at conversation stage. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much. I'm around all week.